Well, good evening, visitors. Welcome to the Australian War Memorial's Last Post ceremony, which today commemorates the 100th anniversary of the Battle of Menin Road. My name is Richard Cruz, and joining us today from the Royal Australian Navy is Chief Petty Officer Anthony McPherson. We're honoured to acknowledge the Honourable Dan Tehan, Minister for Veterans Affairs, representing the Prime Minister. His Excellency, Mr. Sumio Kasaka, Ambassador of Japan. The Honourable Dr. Mike Kelly, Shadow Assistant Minister for Defence, Industry and Support. Ms. Gabe Rodman, Shadow Assistant Minister for Cyber Security and Defence. Commodore David Greaves, representing the Chief of Navy. Air Vice Marshal Gavin Turnbull, Deputy Chief of Air Force. Mr. Robert Dick, National President of the Returned and Services League of Australia. Mr. B.J. Clark, National President of the Royal New Zealand Returned and Services Association. Brigadier Andrew Fremantle, Trustee of the Royal Commonwealth Ex-Service League. Mrs. Pat McCabe, National President of TPI Federation. Mrs. Meg Green, National President of the War Widows Guild of Australia. Mr. Ken Foster, National President of the Vietnam Veterans Association of Australia, as well as representatives of RSL state and sub-branches who are in attendance this evening. We also warmly welcome Australian Defence Force Academy, Royal Australian Air Force Officer Cadets who are in attendance this evening as well. We welcome the veterans who have served, those that are still serving, and the families that support them. We acknowledge the members of RSL and Services Clubs Association, RSL Victoria and RSL Queensland, who are watching the broadcast of this ceremony across Australia. During this evening's ceremony, wreaths will be laid at the base of the Pool of Reflection by visitors and students on behalf of the following schools. From New South Wales, Charlestown South Public School. From Victoria, Gilson College, Taylors Hill Campus. From the Northern Territory, Willowra School. From Western Australia, Singleton Primary School. And from Queensland, the Anzac Indigenous Cultural Study Tour. Australia's Federation Guard is a tri-service ceremonial unit of the Australian Defence Force. They provide a ceremonial presence at civil and military events and during visits to Australia by foreign dignitaries. The Guard will now dismount the catapult party from the tomb of the unknown Australian soldier. ask you to please stand and join in singing the national anthem. I would now like to invite Dr. Brendan Nelson, Director of the Australian War Memorial, to address you.
Students, you may be seated. I further add to the acknowledgement and welcomes the Aboriginal students that are here today, and cloaking us in this commemorative area among those 102,700 names of Australian men and women are many Aboriginal Australians here in the heart of the land they loved. There were three great battles of the First World War: Verdun, the Somme, and Passchendaele, the third battle of Ypres. And for an entire generation of Australians, one single word would convey inconsolable grieving, mourning and bereavement, and that is Passchendaele. It began on the 31st of July 1917. Over the preceding 2 weeks, from mid-July, the British, from 3,000 artillery guns, had fired 4.2 million shells into Flanders. And then a series of steps under General Plumer were undertaken, and the first of these, which involved the Australians, we commemorate here today, and that is the Battle of the Menin Road. Side by side, the 1st and 2nd Australian Divisions attacked in the centre, flanked by 11 British divisions. It went to plan, a great success. The advancing barrage winning ground occupied by the infantry. In less than 3 hours, across a 12-kilometre front, all of the objectives had been taken, but at a cost of 5,013 Australian dead, wounded and missing. 2 Australians were awarded the Victoria Cross, Private Reg Roy Inwood, and 2nd Lieutenant Fred Burks, whose story we will hear shortly. The Australian official photographer, Frank Hurley, wrote of what he saw on the Menin Road. He said the way was gruesome, awful beyond words. The dead and wounded lay about everywhere. The ground had the appearance of being ploughed as if by a great canal excavator and then reploughed. Through this, the wounded had to drag themselves, and those mortally wounded pass out their young lives. The battlefield, on which we won an advance of 1,500 yards, was littered with bits of men, literally drenched in blood. Charles Bean, the official First World War correspondent, described the men coming out of the line on the Menin Road. Looking like a dead man looks, he said. a man of the 20th Battalion had a wound inside the thigh still bleeding. Passing me, he grinned, "We got the bastards good on the second ridge." It is 100 years ago today that William and Fanny Seabrook of Petersham in Sydney lost their 3 eldest sons, George, Theo and William. Today, in the Battle of the Menin Road, the 17th Battalion attacked in front of the village of Westhook. Lieutenant William Seabrook was hit by a phosphorus shell that killed or wounded every man in the section of the platoon he was leading. In the early hours as William was stretchered from the battlefield, George and Theo were hit by a single artillery shell, killed instantly. George was 25, Theo a year younger. William died a short time later. In the breast pocket of his tunic was a photograph of his mother Fanny. The fragment that killed him had gone through the photo. He was 21 years old. One family, 3 sons, one day, all dead. George and Theo's bodies were never found. Their names are on the Menin Gate Memorial to the Missing in Ypres. 2 of 6,191 Australians so named. At her kitchen table, Fanny Seabrook penned the epitaph for William's grave that she would never see in the Lissentuk Cemetery, a willing sacrifice for world's peace. Today we commemorate and remember the Battle of the Menin Road, and in particular those Australians who served, suffered and died for a world, hopefully, a better peace.
Thank you, Dr. Nelson. The Australian War Memorial was the vision of Charles Bean, Australia's First World War official historian. Bean landed with the Australian troops on Gallipoli and stayed with them at the front through to the end of the war. The idea of this national memorial and museum came to him at Pozières, France, in the depths of the bloody fighting of 1916. Bean's idea was that this would be a place where families and friends could mourn loved ones buried in faraway places. It would also be a place that could help all Australians understand what these men and women had endured and what they had done for us. Bean's vision, to which we remain true, is best expressed as inscribed in the entrance to the memorial's galleries. Here is their spirit, in the heart of the land they loved, and here we guard the record which they themselves made. Tonight, we'll read the story behind just one of those on the Roll of Honour, which lists the names of more than 102,000 men and women who have given their lives for us in war and operations over more than a century. But first, we present a lament, Flowers of the Forest. Wreaths and floral tributes will now be laid at the base of the Pool of Reflection.
Today we remember and pay tribute to Second Lieutenant Frederick Burks. Frederick Burks was born on the 16th of August 1894 in Flintshire, Wales, to Samuel and Mary Burks. Frederick's father died when he was 5 years old, but little is known of how the family managed without him. Frederick came to Australia in 1913, arriving at the age of 18. He probably first arrived at Fremantle, but went straight on to South Australia, where he spent some time boarding with Mrs. Cornelius in Norwood, Adelaide. He also lived in Largs Bay, near Port Adelaide, where he struck up a friendship with Miss Susie Gelvin. He would undertake a brief correspondence with her, but they lost track during the war. On the outbreak of war, Burks was living and working with Herbert Jones in Melbourne. Jones later moved to Tasmania, but Burks enlisted for service in the Australian Imperial Force as soon as it was possible to do so, leaving some of his belongings with Jones for safekeeping. Burks was posted to the 2nd Field Ambulance and left Australia for active service overseas on the 19th of October 1914. He served as a stretcher bearer on Gallipoli and was later recommended for the Military Medal for carrying wounded single-handedly under shell and rifle fire from positions where it was impossible to take stretchers at Anzac on the 25th of April 1916, and doing much the same at Cape Helles the following month. He was wounded in June 1915, but not badly enough to keep him from his work for more than a day. Following the evacuation from Gallipoli, he was sent to France to fight on the Western Front, arriving at the end of March 1916. In April, Burks was promoted to Lance Corporal, and in late July and early August 1916, he saw action near the French village of Pozières. He was again recommended for an award for repeatedly leading his squad of stretcher bearers through Pozières Wood and the village from the front line, many of the regimental stretcher bearers being out of action. All of this while under heavy shell fire. This time he was awarded the Military Medal. Burks continued with the 2nd Field Ambulance throughout the bitterly cold winter of 1916 and 17. In March 1917, he was selected for officer training. He was commissioned as 2nd Lieutenant and transferred to the 6th Battalion in May. 4 months later, at the 6th Battalion, was involved in the Battle of Menin Road. At 10:30 p.m. on the 19th of September, the men filed out into position on tapes laid in no man's land. At 5:40 a.m. the following morning, the battalion advanced after a sudden artillery barrage. 2nd Lieutenant Burks and Lance Corporal King met the first enemy resistance, rushing a German strongpoint that was holding up the battalion's advance. Lance Corporal King was wounded by a bomb, but Burks continued. He killed the rest of the Germans in the strongpoint and captured a machine gun. Still not finished, he organised a small party of men and took them to attack another strongpoint, killing and capturing about 25 Germans. Once his battalion had reached their objective, he worked tirelessly to organise parties of men to consolidate their gains and make the new position ready to defend. It was later recorded that by his wonderful coolness and personal bravery, 2nd Lieutenant Burks kept his men in splendid spirits throughout. Later, as Burks was at his post, he and his men came under an artillery barrage. Some of his men were buried by the blast of a shell. As Burks was attempting to get them out, another shell landed nearby, killing him. He was later buried nearby. Burke's courage and gallantry on the 20th of September did not go unnoticed. He was commended for the British Army's highest honour, the Victoria Cross, which was awarded to him posthumously. Today, Frederick Burks lies in the Perth Cemetery in Belgium under the words, "Greater love hath no man than this, that he lay down his life for his friends." He was 23 years old. His name is listed on the Roll of Honour on my right, among more than 60,000 Australians who died while serving in the First World War. His photograph is displayed beside the pool of reflection. This is but one of the many stories of service and sacrifice told here at the Australian War Memorial. We now remember Second Lieutenant Frederick Burks, who gave his life for us, our freedoms, and in the hope of a better world.
Please stand for the reading of the Ode and the sounding of the last post.
They shall grow not old, as we that are left grow old. Age shall not weary them, nor the years condemn. At the going down of the sun, and in the morning, we will remember them.
We will remember them. Lest we forget. We leave you this evening with the words of the memorial's founder, Charles Bean. Many a man lying out there at Pozières or in the low scrub at Gallipoli, with his poor, tired senses barely working through the fever of his brain, has thought in his last moments, well, it's over. But in Australia, they will be proud of this. Ladies and gentlemen, girls and boys, that concludes the last post ceremony. We thank you for visiting the Australian War Memorial and wish you all a very good evening. Thank you.